One photograph. That's all it took. One single image hit the internet, and within hours the entire sports media machine had made up its mind about Shedeur Sanders' character, his priorities, his commitment level, and apparently his entire future in the NFL. No investigation, no context, no conversation with a single person who was actually there that day. Just a photograph, a hot take, and a broadcast microphone pointed at someone who used to coach football over a decade ago. Here's what's wild though. When you actually find out what was happening in that photo, the entire argument doesn't just weaken, it completely collapses. And the people pushing the hardest against Shedeur right now, they knew that. Some of them had the full context sitting right in front of them and chose the take anyway. Because in 2026, the louder you are, the more clicks you get, and the truth has never been particularly loud. Before you drop your take in the comments, and I want you to ask yourself this one question. If Patrick Mahomes was in that exact same photograph, would we even be having this conversation right now? Hold that thought, because by the end of this video, the answer is going to tell you everything. Drop your honest answer right now in the comments before we go any further. Do you think Shedeur Sanders is genuinely building something real, or do you think the brand is starting to swallow the football player? I want the raw take, no fence sitting, because this conversation is about to get a whole lot more complicated than a jersey wall and a Rex Ryan soundbite.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
Let's set the scene properly, because context is the one thing that got completely stripped out of this story from the very beginning. Rex Ryan, former Jets head coach, former Bills head coach, current full-time ESPN personality with a hot take quota that doesn't care whether it's football season or not, looked at a photograph of Shedeur Sanders. In that image, Shedeur was standing in front of what appeared to be a wall of his own jerseys. His number, his name, his brand displayed prominently with cameras around and people watching. And from that single frame, Rex Ryan constructed an entire character indictment. The take, stripped down to its core, was this. A quarterback who is truly serious about winning, about competing at the highest level, about putting the work in during the offseason, does not spend his time on personal brand maintenance. The wall of jerseys wasn't community service in Rex's reading. It was a monument to Shedeur's own ego. Evidence, he said, that the influencer identity was winning the internal battle against the football player identity. That take spread fast. And honestly, it's worth understanding why, because these things don't go viral by accident. The reason it moved the way it did is because it fit a narrative that was already warm and ready to go. Shedeur Sanders has been polarizing since before he was drafted. He came into the league with opinions, with a following, with a swagger that made certain corners of the sports world deeply uncomfortable. So when Rex offered a photograph as proof of what those corners already suspected, the algorithm did the rest. The clip circulated, the debate ignited, and suddenly the entire NFL conversation for a full news cycle revolved around one image that told approximately 15% of the actual story. Here's something important to understand about how sports media operates at this level. Speed is the currency. The first person to frame a story owns that story, at least for the first 24 to 48 hours. By the time the full context emerges, by the time the nuance catches up to the initial take, most people have already moved on. The correction never travels as far as the original accusation. That's not a new phenomenon. That's just how the attention economy has always worked. But in the era of short-form video and algorithmic amplification, it moves faster and hits harder than it ever did before. Rex Ryan didn't invent that dynamic. He just knows how to use it. And a photograph of Shedeur Sanders surrounded by his own jerseys, without any explanation of what was actually happening in that room, is exactly the kind of image that becomes a weapon when you're in the business of generating conversation rather than generating insight. So what was actually happening in that room? Because that question, the one Rex either didn't ask or didn't find useful to answer, is where this entire argument begins to fall apart. And the answer is a whole lot more interesting than the take suggested. 500 kids, free admission, not a single ticket sold, not a single family asked to pay a dime. That's the part of the story that got buried under the hot take. The jerseys on that wall behind Shedeur Sanders were not decorations for a personal photo shoot. They were part of an organized youth camp event, the kind of operation that requires real planning, real money, and real logistical effort to pull off at the scale it actually happened. 500 young people showed up that day who otherwise would not have had access to anything remotely like it.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
And the resources that made it possible, the travel arrangements, the equipment, the organization behind the whole thing that didn't happen by accident. That happened because someone with a platform decided to use it for something beyond themselves. Now let's be genuinely honest here, because fair analysis means applying the same standard to everyone. Did Shedeur also generate content from that event? Yes. Was his name and his brand visible throughout? Absolutely. Did cameras document the day in a way that would eventually find its way back to his channels and his platform? No question. All of that is true simultaneously. And if you want to argue that those two things can't coexist, that genuine community investment is somehow canceled out by the fact that it also served a branding purpose, then you have to apply that standard universally. You have to look at every charitable foundation event that every professional athlete has ever held, every jersey giveaway, every youth clinic, every hospital visit that got filmed and posted, and decide whether all of those were also just vanity projects dressed up as generosity. Most people aren't willing to go that far, because most people understand intuitively that an athlete using a charitable event to also generate content is just how the modern world works. The two things are not in conflict. They never were. The only time they seem to be in conflict is when the athlete in question is already a controversial figure, already carrying a target on his back, already operating in an environment where every move gets measured against a standard of suspicion rather than good faith. Here's what's particularly telling about the way this story unfolded. The people who were actually in the room breaking down the full context of the event, the journalists and analysts who had done the actual reporting, they presented those facts on air. The free admission, the 500 kids, the logistics, all of it was laid out clearly. And the response from the side pushing the original take wasn't acknowledgement. It wasn't a revision. It wasn't even a concession that the fuller picture changes the equation somewhat. The take stayed exactly where it started because the take had already done its job. It was already out there. It was already circulating. And that tells you something critical about the difference between sports analysis and sports commentary in the year 2026. One of them is trying to get it right. The other one is trying to stay loud. Those are not the same goal and they don't produce the same results. But that double standard around Shedeur goes a whole lot deeper than just this one moment. Because the behavior being criticized, every quarterback in this league does it, just not as visibly. And that distinction is absolutely everything. Patrick Mahomes was at the FIFA World Cup this summer. Let that land for a second. The reigning face of the NFL, the quarterback with the rings and the legacy and the bulletproof reputation, took time out of his offseason to attend one of the most globally watched sporting events on the planet. He was photographed. He was visible. He was clearly not in a film room somewhere studying formations. And the response from Rex Ryan, from ESPN, from the broader sports commentary universe: silence. Absolute silence. Nobody suggested Mahomes was distracted. Nobody questioned whether his priorities were in the right order. Nobody grabbed that image and held it up as evidence that he cares more about his celebrity status than about competing for another championship. Joe Burrow was doing fan conventions during this same window. Public appearances, signing sessions, brand visibility events, the kind of thing that takes real hours out of a real day. Same weekend, same basic category of activity, same fundamental question about how a quarterback chooses to spend his off-season time. And again, the response from the hot take machine. Nothing. No think piece. No segment. No concerned former coach, with a microphone suggesting that Burrow's commitment level deserves a second look. So the behavior is identical. The only variable that changed is the name attached to it. And if the behavior is what's actually being criticized, the behavior should produce the same reaction regardless of whose name is on the jersey. The fact that it doesn't is the entire story. The fact that it doesn't exposes this for what it really is, which has very little to do with football preparation and everything to do with who gets the benefit of the doubt in this league, and who walks in already fighting against a predetermined narrative. Now, some people are going to push back on this comparison and say it's not fair because Mahomes has already earned his status. He's proven himself, and an established starter with multiple championships gets more latitude than a young quarterback still trying to win a starting job. And look, there's a surface logic to that argument. There's a version of the world where that reasoning makes sense. But think about what that version actually requires you to believe. It requires you to believe that the standard of scrutiny applied to a young player trying to prove himself should be more severe than the standard applied to a proven star. It requires you to believe that the guy who hasn't won yet owes more of his personal time to football than the guy who's already won everything. That's not really a commitment argument anymore. That's a punishment argument. That's saying young athletes should live under a more restrictive set of rules than their more established counterparts, and those rules should ease up only after you've already succeeded. That's a system that makes the climb harder, not easier, and it's worth calling out exactly for what it is. But here's the part that almost nobody is addressing. The NFL itself isn't bothered by any of this, and the reason why reveals everything about where the real power in this conversation actually lives. The average NFL career lasts roughly 3 years. 3 years. For all the sacrifice, all the training, all the physical punishment that gets absorbed from youth football through college through the pros, the median player is done before most people have figured out their career path. And for quarterbacks, the timeline can be longer, but it can also end overnight. One snap, one wrong landing, one moment where everything changes and the football career is over before anyone was ready for it to be. In that reality, building a personal brand during your playing career isn't a distraction. It's one of the smartest financial decisions a young athlete can make, because the brand survives the injury. The following persists after the retirement. The business you built while people were paying attention becomes the foundation for everything that comes after the playing days end. And in a league where careers are brutally short and the physical cost is brutally high, that kind of financial thinking isn't selfish. It's self-preservation dressed up as content creation. Shedeur Sanders did not invent this strategy. He just executes it more visibly than most. He built a following back in his college days that gave him leverage most rookies don't have walking into the league. He understood from early on that the platform he was building had real monetary value, and he treated it accordingly. And in doing so, he is doing something that financial advisors would recommend to every single professional athlete in every professional sport if those athletes were willing to listen. Build something that exists independent of the game. Create value that doesn't disappear when the coach stops calling your number. Here's what makes this conversation particularly interesting from a business standpoint. The NFL franchises understand this completely. The front offices, the ownership groups, the people who are actually responsible for the financial health of these organizations, they have already internalized the value of having a highly visible, highly marketable quarterback on their roster. Jersey sales, merchandise, local market interest, national media attention, television ratings. All of those numbers move when you have a player the public is genuinely invested in following. And a quarterback who brings a built-in audience with him to his team is not a problem to be managed. He's a revenue stream to be leveraged. So while certain segments of the broadcast world are staging performative outrage about a wall of jerseys at a youth camp, the actual business of professional football has already moved on to a completely different conversation. That conversation is about how to maximize the commercial value of having a player like Shedeur in your building, not how to convince him to behave more like it's 1998. The disconnect between what the league actually wants and what certain commentators claim to be troubled by is breathtaking when you look at it directly. And it raises a genuinely important question about whose interests the outrage is actually serving, because it's clearly not serving football. So what is it serving? The answer takes us directly to understanding what Rex Ryan's job actually is in 2026 and why that changes every single word he says. Rex Ryan has not coached an NFL team since 2016. That's a decade. And in that decade, an enormous amount has changed about how this league operates, how players train, how they recover, how they manage their schedules, and what the culture inside a modern quarterback room actually looks like. He is not embedded in any of it. He is watching from the outside, through a camera lens, with a production team in his ear and a studio audience waiting for something worth talking about. That's not a criticism of Rex Ryan the person. That's just a description of Rex Ryan the job. And it's an important description because the job shapes the incentive. His paycheck does not come from accuracy. It does not come from nuance or careful analysis or getting the full picture before forming an opinion. It comes from generating reaction. It comes from saying something that makes people stop scrolling, something that gets clipped and shared and argued about on social media for the next 24 to 48 hours. In the business he's in right now, the most valuable thing you can produce is a take that people cannot ignore, regardless of whether that take holds up under scrutiny. Shedeur Sanders is, at this particular moment, the single most reliable reaction generator in NFL discourse. Anything connected to his name produces immediate, passionate, polarized response. People who love him come out swinging. People who are skeptical of him come out just as hard in the other direction. The algorithm rewards that energy. The show's producers reward that energy. And Rex Ryan, who has been doing this long enough to understand exactly what the machine wants from him, delivered exactly that energy on cue. Now here's the part that actually matters. According to the reporting around this specific situation, Rex had the full context available. The information was there. The details about the 500 kids, the free admission, the logistics, the genuine community effort behind the event, that information was present in the conversation. He wasn't operating on incomplete data. He was operating on a complete picture and choosing to emphasize the slice of it that produced the most combustible take. That's a choice, a deliberate, strategic, professionally motivated choice. And when the fuller context was laid out and the expectation might have been that the take would at least soften slightly, it didn't move an inch. Because in the commentary business, walking something back costs you credibility in the short term. It makes you look like you got it wrong. Doubling down, staying the course, insisting on your original read even as the evidence shifts, that reads as conviction. It reads as confidence. And confidence is the one thing that keeps you on the air in a business built on loud opinions rather than careful ones. None of that makes the take correct, but it explains exactly why the take exists, why it spread the way it did, and why it persisted even after the facts caught up to it. Understanding the incentive structure is the only way to consume sports media without getting played by it. And the really sharp question is whether that same incentive structure is the one driving a broader set of narratives around Shedeur Sanders that don't stand up any better than this one did. Because there's a reasonable case to be made for Rex's side here, a thin one, but a real one, and it deserves a genuine hearing before we dismiss it entirely. Let's be intellectually honest here, because that's the only way this conversation is actually worth having. There is a version of Rex Ryan's argument that isn't just nostalgia, and it isn't just a ratings play. It's thinner than the broadcast version, it's more nuanced, and it doesn't arrive pre-packaged with indignation. But it's real, and it deserves to be engaged with seriously rather than dismissed. The distinction it draws goes something like this. There is a meaningful difference between a professional athlete spending personal time on a charitable endeavor and a professional athlete actively constructing and amplifying their personal brand through that charitable endeavor. The first one is just a person doing something good with their day off. The second one is a business operation that happens to also produce community value as a byproduct. And when you're a young quarterback who hasn't yet established your position in the league, who is still in the process of proving that the football player takes priority over every other identity you've built, the optics of that second version carry weight. Not because it's wrong, but because it's the kind of thing that signals where the energy is flowing. That's the steel-manned version. It's not about the time spent, it's about the signal sent. And the argument is that a guy still fighting for a starting job might want the primary visible signal to be football obsession rather than brand expansion. Fair point to raise. Uncomfortable, but fair. Here's why it still doesn't hold up as an actual indictment, though. The entire premise requires you to believe that what Shedeur projects publicly is an accurate window into what's happening inside the building. And by every account from people who are actually inside that building, those two things don't match. The public-facing version of Shedeur Sanders is loud, visible, and unapologetically brand-forward. The version his coaches and teammates see every day is someone who is reportedly putting the work in, addressing the areas that need addressing, and taking the preparation side of this seriously. The broader counterpoint is also worth stating plainly. 500 kids got a free experience because of that event. 500 families got a day they couldn't have afforded otherwise. Whatever branding value Shedeur extracted from that afternoon, the real-world community impact was genuine, and it was significant. You cannot look at what actually happened for those 500 people and reduce it purely to a marketing exercise without doing a disservice to the actual human beings who were there. And perhaps most importantly, if we're going to hold a standard that says charitable work only counts as charitable work when it happens invisibly, when there are no cameras, no branding, no social media documentation, then we need to apply that standard to every athlete foundation event, every hospital visit that got filmed, every jersey giveaway that ended up on a highlight reel. We don't do that. We give everyone else the benefit of the doubt that the good deed and the content can coexist. The question of why that benefit of the doubt evaporates specifically for Shedeur Sanders leads us somewhere much deeper and much more revealing than one afternoon at a youth camp. This story is not really about Shedeur Sanders, not at its core. What we're watching play out in real time, through this photograph and this hot take and this particular news cycle, is a much larger collision. Two completely different definitions of what professional commitment is supposed to look like are crashing into each other, and the impact is landing on Shedeur's reputation, because he happens to be the most visible young quarterback operating right now at the intersection of those two definitions. The old model, the one Rex Ryan and the generation he represents were trained on, demanded total immersion. Football consumed everything. Your identity, your schedule, your public image, all of it pointed in one direction and one direction only. You were a football player first, last, and in every space in between. Off-seasons were not opportunities, they were obligations. You went home, you trained in relative obscurity, you came back ready to play, and you did not build a personal media empire while any of that was happening. That was the expectation. That was the culture. And for a long time, for the era it existed in, it made a certain kind of sense. That era is gone. It is not coming back, and the players who are entering this league in the mid-2020s were not raised in it, did not train in it, and do not owe allegiance to its standards. They grew up in a world where visibility is currency, where a following is an asset, where the ability to build a platform is a skill as valuable and as hard-won as any other. They watched athletes and creators before them build genuine businesses around their personal brands, and they understood, earlier than any previous generation, that the sport is a vehicle as much as it is a destination. You can love the game deeply and still understand that the game has a shelf life, and that the smart move is to build something that outlasts it. Shedeur Sanders is not unusual in his generation for thinking this way. He's unusual in his willingness to do it openly and without apology. Most players in his age bracket are building the same kind of platform, cultivating the same kind of following, thinking the same kind of long-term financial thoughts. They're just doing it more quietly. They've figured out that being visible about it invites exactly the kind of scrutiny Shedeur is navigating right now, so they keep it lower profile. Shedeur came up in a situation, playing for his father at Colorado, in front of a national spotlight that was always going to be enormous, that didn't allow for that kind of quiet brand building. He was always going to be visible. He made a choice to lean into that visibility rather than fight against it. Whether you personally find that admirable or irritating probably has more to do with how old you are and which era of athlete culture you were shaped by than it does with any objective judgment about his character. And that's worth sitting with, because it means a lot of this criticism isn't really football criticism at all. It's generational discomfort wearing football language as a disguise. And what the league's power structure actually thinks about all of this reveals just how thin that disguise really is. Here is the part of this conversation that cuts through every argument on every side and settles, at least on a practical level, what actually matters. The NFL ownership groups, the franchise front offices, the people whose actual financial interests are tied to the performance and commercial appeal of these players, have already made their decision about the modern athlete economy. They made it years ago, and their decision is not the same one that certain corners of sports media keep pretending is still up for debate. What NFL franchises want from their marquee players in 2026 is visibility. They want engagement. They want jersey sales and merchandise numbers and local market penetration, and the kind of national attention that moves television ratings and fills stadiums. They want players who bring audiences with them. And a quarterback who walks into your building already carrying a massive built-in following, already capable of generating conversation and commercial activity around your franchise without you having to manufacture it from scratch. That is not a management headache. That is a competitive advantage. The league's own business model has already adapted completely to the personal brand economy. The NFL actively encourages players to build social media presences. Their marketing infrastructure is designed around amplifying individual player personalities. The commercial partnerships, the branded content, the platform integrations, all of it operates on the assumption that players are individuals with their own brands, not interchangeable units to be protected from the distractions of visibility. That ship has sailed so far past the horizon that the people still arguing against it can't even see the water anymore. So when you map the Rex Ryan criticism against the actual economic reality of how NFL franchises operate and what they genuinely value from their players, the criticism doesn't just seem outdated. It seems completely disconnected from the industry it claims to be analyzing. The people who are most upset about Shedeur's brand visibility are almost exclusively people who are not inside these organizations, who are not making these decisions, and who are not financially accountable for whether the take is correct or not. The people who are inside these organizations, who are making these decisions, who are signing the checks, they are not losing sleep over a youth camp content day. They are losing sleep over yards per attempt and completion percentage under pressure, and whether the guy can process a defense at NFL speed. Those are football questions, and the answers to those football questions will be found on Sundays, not in the comments section of a photograph. Here's the bottom line on the institutional piece. The league has voted with its investment. The market for a visible, commercially powerful young quarterback is enormous. The Cleveland Browns selected Shedeur Sanders knowing exactly who he is and how he operates. That decision was not made by people who were troubled by his brand. It was made by people who understood it, evaluated it, and decided the football player and the brand builder were worth the pick. That's the verdict that matters. Everything else is just noise. And there's only one thing that will silence the noise permanently, and it's not a perfect response to a Rex Ryan take. It's winning football games, and that chapter hasn't been written yet. Here's where we land. One photograph became a national debate, and that national debate, when you pull back far enough to see the whole picture, turns out to have almost nothing to do with whether Shedeur Sanders takes football seriously. It has everything to do with who gets the benefit of the doubt in this league, who gets to decide what commitment looks like in 2026, and which generation's definition of professionalism gets treated as the default. The double standard isn't a side note here. It is the story. When the same behavior earns a pass for Mahomes and a character indictment for Shedeur, you're not watching sports analysis anymore. You're watching something older and less comfortable than that. The only thing that actually closes this conversation for good is production. And that part, the part that happens on Sundays under the lights when none of the commentary noise matters, that's still ahead of us. So I want to hear from you right now. Is Shedeur Sanders the future of how NFL quarterbacks operate, or does the old school model still hold weight in today's game? Drop it in the comments. I'm reading every single one. If this video opened your eyes to something, hit that like button and subscribe to Gridiron Ground because we're just getting started.